Well, my name's Amanda Dowson-Young. I'm the CEO of The Tablet, and it's my absolute pleasure to be able to host this evening, which is unusual. Normally, I hand over to one of our journalists to do this for us, but this evening, I was really taken by conversations I'd had with Maureen and Mary in just pulling this webinar together. So I thought if it's okay with all of you, I'd like to host this one myself. Um, so I'd just like to introduce our two speakers this evening. We've got Maureen O'Neill, OBE. She's the Director of Faith in Older People, a pioneering Scottish charity promoting the spiritual well-being of older adults across faith traditions. She was awarded an OBE in 2019 for services to older people and voluntary organisations. And we also have Mary Dunn. She's a former NHS clinical psychologist with extensive experience in ageing and spirituality, an active parish member, a writer, and a caregiver to her husband who's living with dementia. And she's offering a deeply human and theologically reflective perspective this evening. Tonight, the Tablet webinar is about faith and the elderly, holding fast in a changing church. And we're going to be talking about what it actually means to grow older in a church that's changing. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about liturgy, the liturgical process, about changes, about synodality. So it's really just looking at all of that from the focus of this changing church. So as moral emphasis and doctrinal interpretations evolve, many Catholics are facing deep shifts in church that they've loved and served for decades. So in this talk, we're going to be looking at how the wisdom of age can be honoured when novelty is often prioritised. And we look at what does the church owe its elders spiritually, pastorally, and liturgically. Just talking to you first, Maureen, can you give us your perspective on faith and the elderly from your background?
Well, a little bit about myself, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be co-presenting with Mary, with whom I've had lots of really interesting discussions. So we hope will reflect our thoughts about older people within our churches this evening. I've been Director of Faith and Older People for the past 17 years. The focus of the organisation, as Amanda said, has been on the spiritual care of older people, whether in care homes, in their own homes, or generally as congregation members. And we work across all denominations. And it's really important that we look at the talents and the contributions and the gifts that older people bring to our congregations, as well as what they need. And I think we will try and find a balance this evening between those things, which I think is important. I've worked in the voluntary sector in Scotland for the past 40 years, and have worked in older people's organisations as well as latterly, as I said, with faith in older people. But there's always been a reflection about the spiritual and religious needs of older people, because in the care setting, those are the things that often give people resilience. And we really want to focus on that. As I'm just in my late 70s, I also am thinking about reflection in older age and what has really mattered to me during my life, and the things that I might do differently now that I've retired from formal work. And I think that's quite a nice time to be at the moment. Faith in older people's work was based on the definition of spirituality being that of meaning and purpose. And there are many definitions of spirituality, but this is fundamental to all of them. One of the definitions I particularly like states, it is the search for that which gives zest, energy, meaning, and identity to the person's life in relation to other people and the wider world. And I think our conversation will reflect all those things. But I think we need to be clear what spiritual care and spirituality is and how people view religious care. And in Scotland, where I'm based, the definition that is used by chaplains and within the sort of Scottish Government health service context is spiritual care is usually given in a one-to-one relationship. It's completely person-centered and makes no assumptions about personal conviction or orientation. However, religious care is given in the context of shared religious beliefs, values, liturgies, and lifestyle of the person's particular faith community. So, in other words, spiritual care is not necessarily religious, but religious care at its best should always be spiritual. So it's that very fine balance.
Mm.
Our founder, Malcolm Goldsmith, felt very strongly about the potential for churches to play an important role in the support of older people as their needs changed physically, spiritually, and emotionally. He felt particularly strongly about how how churches supported people experiencing dementia and how this challenged faith communities. And in particular, he was coming from a church background. He was an Episcopal priest based in Scotland, but worked very closely with the Dementia Services Centre at Stirling University and previously in his own congregation, both in Edinburgh and in Bradford. Out of this vision that he had for faith in older people, what we've done is we've developed resources for churches on supporting people with dementia, worked with care homes and others on developing a better understanding of spirituality. We've developed educational resources on spirituality for universities and FE colleges. And alongside this, we've undertaken over all these years many seminars that brought in different aspects of what it means to be growing old and the sorts of issues that confront older people and those who care for them. But one thing we did do about 3 years ago, we published a report on the contribution made by older people in their faith community, both for community members, but also to the wider community. And this has included dementia cafes, bereavement support, mental health support, and it could be food banks, support to refugees, and so much more. And the report is called The Gift of Age, and it's quite remarkable about the gifts that people bring. And I think it's important that we look at the balance between contribution and support, because there's a mutuality there that's really important. So in our conversation this evening, I think Mary and I hope to begin to explore some of these issues and what our responses could be for the future.
Mm. Mm.
Mary, just going over to you, what
Yes.
in terms of your experience?
Yes. I'm just about to be 80, so that's my first qualification for being here. And in addition to caring for my husband, I've also put together a talk, which I've now given several times, on the spirituality of aging. And just giving that talk has been a really interesting experience, and getting the feedback from the audience. And I wanted to take part this evening because how often does one hear this subject discussed, the experience, the spirituality of the elderly discussed in public? I think that's really very rare. So I feel quite passionate about it. When I was doing, the other thing to say is that I'm a volunteer in the care home where I live next door in one of the cottages. And so I'm just on such a learning curve with working with those people in the care home, and it's a tremendous experience from my point of view. When I was doing the talk on spirituality of aging, I was using a series of different developmental models which came at the subject from different aspects. And so, you know, that's kind of what is in me. The other thing that I wanted to really bring to the fore is that I've been doing some reading about what happened during the pandemic in relation to elderly people in this country. There are some people who've talked about it as a geriatric genocide, which is very strong language. There were apparently 27,000 excess deaths amongst people in care homes. And many of you will remember that the government issued a decree, an instruction on the fact that over 80 people were not to be admitted to an intensive care unit at the time. That was in place for a year. And so what I've been reading about is the sense in which this represents very deep underlying thoughts and feelings about elderly people. I think Boris Johnson said at one stage that it was fine for them to die because they'd had a good innings. And we have to be so aware that those are underlying assumptions and thoughts about elderly people. And if within our churches and within our communities, it may be really important that we're aware of that and that we're counteracting it as far as possible. It's very shocking and it needs a lot of thinking about. And so having said those things, and coming from that kind of context of prejudice, it feels hugely important to be thinking and talking about the experience and spirituality of the elderly. Do you want to say anything about that, Maureen?
Well, I think we're probably in a society where there's a considerable amount of sort of ageist attitudes,
Yeah.
and a feeling that older people have had it all, and older people are rich and young people are being discriminated against because they can't buy houses and so on. And you hear this sort of theme. And I came across a quote which I think is helpful, because we're looking at church in the context of the whole society. So there's a reflection from one to the other. And the quote is, ageism is when we think that a certain age is inferior to other ages, and we act unjustly towards that age group. And Mary's just illustrated that profoundly. When value is not given to older people, they may be given less opportunities, and it may be considered that their lives are not particularly useful. And I think that's something that we must guard against within our church communities, as we need to do in the wider society. And I think, Mary, do you feel there's some sort of stigma attached to older people within our church groups?
I haven't come across such a stigma. What I just wanted to quote were the number of times in the gospel that Jesus says, the ones you think of as the least important are the most important. And that is so much his theme all the way through. So, coming at it from a Christian perspective, that's where we're coming from.
And equally, Jesus said we should be accepted for what we are and where we are, really. And I think that's critically important. But we have to acknowledge that age brings a lot of change. It makes changes to what we're able to do sometimes, what we wish to do, the losses and grief that people experience as we grow older.
Mm.
And sometimes there's a sort of isolation that comes about with older age. And that really is why our faith communities are so important, as they can provide that and should provide that kind of support and companionship and friendship, which I think sustains us.
Mm. It's interesting. Teilhard de Chardin talked about the powers of diminishment, and that's what we're talking about. Is we often think of it as older people kind of going downhill. I actually think they are climbing the most immense mountain, both emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, because elderly people are working with all the existential issues. They are I've got a little list of the things that older people are working their way through. We're working with a variety of losses, not just of people, but of independence and of healthiness and of the ability to go to the supermarket by themselves. They're dealing with inevitably unresolved grief, going back possibly generations. And so those losses and that grief is deeply inside and is sometimes locked in the unconscious and desperately needing to be brought through to consciousness and thought about, maybe talked about. They're also letting go of unimportant things. We've all, at this age, we have decluttered probably several times. And it's very common for people in the care home to say, oh, yes, I had something that was really precious, but I don't know where it is now because it got left behind when I came in here. There's also, they're dealing with a recognition of their own faults and failings and an experience of their own guilt and their need for forgiveness. They're reviewing their experiences of life, in particular the things they regret, the things they wish they hadn't said or done. And they're continually learning and growing in a stage of constant development. So rather than going downhill, they're actually going up a very, very steep climb. And one of the models that came to me when I was doing the talk is that this is a natural monastery. It's a place of enormous reflection. And often people are dealing with their anxiety, which may be lifelong as a challenge. So it's interesting that Richard Rohr says, the Franciscan priest says, we grow spiritually much more by doing it wrong than by doing it right. And older people are working through those things that have maybe been experienced by them and others as failures. So there is a massive amount of work going on.
And I think that work's really important, and how congregations can support older people to do some of that, whether it's in a care home or through attendance at services. And I think one of the things that we discussed was the importance of storytelling.
Yes.
Actually getting people to tell you their story, and it might come in bits, dribs and drabs over a period of time. So it might not be chronological, and everyone's approach is different. But it helps people to think about what really mattered to them during their life and what sustains them currently. And I'm sure all of us have reflected on older people, or any of us, needing someone to talk to, someone who doesn't have to rush off and give you medicine, or rush off because, it's a family member and you don't want to upset them or burden them with, oh, granny's at it again kind of thing, telling us a story. And what the story does is actually give somebody a sense of identity. I really did these things, you know, I really played an important part, but I regret this, or I really was happy with that. And I think there are ways of doing that. The listening part is really important. And one of the things that Professor John Swinton um, drew together with Dr. Harriet Mowat was something called the Purple Bicycle. And it was a way of telling stories with somebody that you knew quite well. It could be a friend or a family member, and someone in the care home. And gradually, this story would come out. And we've, through Faith in Older People, we've done this in congregations as well. And it's really important, but it also has somebody to reflect the story off as well, who can produce maybe photographs or other things to do that. So it also points to the spiritual needs that somebody has, which Mary, I know, has been looking at quite carefully.
Yes. Yes, it's so interesting that when I'm in the care home and people are telling their stories, you just feel that there's such a preciousness about what one is hearing. It's like, it's like standing in front of the burning bush and you need to take off your shoes because this is holy ground when you're listening. And the depth of the experience that's being shared can be really quite awesome.
Mm. And,
Um,
and sometimes it works in groups, and other times it's just an individual who wants
yeah,
to tell
absolutely.
their story. But I think there are opportunities for that storytelling within our congregations. I'm of the Episcopal tradition, and in the church that I'm a member of, every year we call it a day of discovery, and we set aside time for people to tell their stories as far as they want through photographs, objects, just telling us.
Mm.
But we also have included what really matters to you in terms of how do you want your spiritual care what do you want it to look like as you grow older, and how can we in the congregation do something about that? We've also looked, and I was very surprised, we ran a day on end of life matters, death and dying. And I thought only a few people would arrive, but we got about 35, 40 people. And they wanted to talk on one hand about the practical issues, but they also wanted to talk about what it felt like to be bereaved and what they needed from each of us as congregation members and what they needed from the clergy. So, and I think from our point of view, we had that discussion, Mary, about where do clergy fit in with all this and what are our expectations?
Yes, absolutely. Just to think about the situation in the churches and the sort of changes that Amanda was introducing at the beginning. I've done quite a lot of canvassing for this in preparation for this webinar. I've talked to as many parishioners as I could fit in, really. And what I've found has been extremely interesting. It, I think what we're looking at, and I mean, change in the church has been going on since the Acts of the Apostles. Different factions within the church has been there since the year dot, and we know about that. And interestingly, the outcome was it is good for the Holy Spirit and for us to do X. So, we're in the context of the synod, we're absolutely speaking that language. Um, and and it becomes very clear that we are in an era of living between two parallel models of church. And people find themselves sometimes having to switch from one model to the other. For example, if they have a new parish priest. So there is the synod in the final document has articulated what these two models might be called and might look like. And the first is what's called the magisterial model, which is very autocratic and hierarchical. And the second model, the synod calls the relational model. And when you see those pictures of them at the synod on the round tables with a whole mixture of laity and clergy and hierarchy, including the Pope, all sitting round a series of tables, what you're looking at is the relational model. That's the flat structure. It isn't hierarchical like that. And so many people, all people, as well as the elderly, are in a situation where they find themselves a little bit strung between those two models of church. I'm not in the business of criticizing or praising either of them. I'm simply identifying that there are those two models and they are happening in our parishes. But what has come through to me talking to people about their experience is it's actually bringing about a situation where people are taking their own responsibility and taking initiative and being very mature. And the older people are, the more they're able to engage at that level. And people have written and said to me, the essentials of what we believe haven't changed in the slightest. Some of the pastoral practices have changed. And so, it's actually meaning that we're developing into a very mature church, both laity and clergy. Do you recognize any of that, Maureen?
I do, and I mean I think it's really important because we're seeing in many congregations sort of empowering members of the congregation to stimulate activity in support of clergy. But
Yeah.
with that, we also need to make sure that I think our experience is that there are areas that are really important within our churches that the clergy receive particular training. And I would say, particularly around end of life. So it's not the practicalities, it's about emotionally and spiritually being with a member of the community. And we found that some people find that really difficult. We all find it difficult.
Yeah.
So there's no reason why members of the clergy shouldn't. But there's almost nothing in the training that certainly in the Protestant faiths actually have a strong focus on. It's about the worship elements, but it's not about that pastoral support. And that's come across in the various consultations that we've done over time. But also, there are a lot of issues around aging itself, supporting someone with dementia, supporting people with mental health problems, that could also be highlighted during training in different denominations to a greater extent, to equip people, not necessarily to do everything, but to understand better.
Yes. And yes, and it's interesting that when we were in the pandemic, and people started to have their liturgical practice online by the streaming, that has actually changed a whole lot of things as a result. Because now, if people don't feel themselves in tune with what is happening in church, they can pick up a streaming where they do feel that they're in tune. So in a sense, the laity are much less driven and organized and sorted by the clergy than they used to be. The pandemic's made a huge difference. And the laity have got the ability to take their own decisions and sort themselves out because they know they have a very deep spirituality, and they know when they're in a sort of like-minded environment. I think that's the only way I can put it.
But I think one of the the whole act of worship is really important for people because it's that ritual that steadies them. It's a foundation on which they practice their faith. And we've seen changes in, I think there are lots of grumbles sometimes in church. All those words have changed. Why have you changed those words? They weren't what I was used to. Why are you singing all these hymns that I don't recognize from my childhood, kind of thing? But the ritual of worship is fundamental to most people, as is routine of being able to go to mass, being able to go to church, and to receiving communion. It's really vital for so many people that they feel they're part of the body of Christ, and it's there. So what we have seen when we've encouraged churches to support people with dementia is maybe having a service that is specific to people experiencing dementia, which is maybe shorter, more illustrative. Maybe you can touch something, and so on. So people aren't deprived of worship, but they're not having to feel they've got to last a long time if they really can't concentrate and not comfortable, because people withdraw because of that. And we don't want to see the loss of the individual and someone who cares for them as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the difficulties for me about this talking at this moment is that it's totally impossible for us to generalize about the elderly and how they react to change. We can't do that. But we can talk about some of the experiences that we've come across. However, there will be people who are very distressed by the things that are happening within the pastoral practice in their parish, and I want to honour those people and speak for them, and I'd like to think that maybe one of the outcomes of today is that they will get greater support. One of the things that I love in the final document of the synod is the phrase that it says that Christians are people who are transformed by Christ. I love that as almost like a definition of being a Christian. And that is so true for the elderly. They have seen it all. They have been through so much on all fronts, and they are on the path of being transformed by Christ.
So that indicates the ability to change and adapt.
Yes.
And an older age maybe gives us all a chance to think back, not in a gloomy kind of way, but actually to think about, what has occurred during our lives and how have we coped with sadnesses and losses and things, because, we lose parents, siblings, and on the one hand, and friends, but we also gain perhaps through friendships that we make. And I think friendships coming out of church is really important. And I think friendship altogether is a significant part of our lives, and we should treasure it as we grow older. I mean, after all, it's a listening ear very often. When somebody's feeling distraught, you go to a friend very often. So I think there are those. Mary, we discussed the sort of spiritual tasks of aging, didn't we? That people perhaps need to be encouraged to think about, and maybe that's where congregations come in, or congregation members, not everybody necessarily, to be alongside, to facilitate that kind of expression, that we actually build those relationships.
Yes, I am very fond of a quote from Abbot Thomas Keating, where he says, "Prayer reveals the emotional junk of a lifetime," and that is so true for people in their later years who are spending time possibly sitting alone, reflecting, and all kinds of things are going to emerge that have been shoved down into the unconscious. And that's what Keating talks about as the emotional junk of a lifetime. And as you say, Maureen, the need there in our parishes, in our communities, is to be with people, to be accompanying that process, so that even, people often in the later years find it difficult to articulate what's happening inside them. And it's very much a question of accompanying that process.
I mean, I think one of the things that's important to develop is that sort of attentive listening.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that individuals within congregations can receive training about, which I think is important. A colleague, Harriet Mowat, who's very involved with spiritual care, looked at the chaplaincy in a group of care homes. And what emerged for her was that chaplains, and maybe Anna chaplains as are being developed across the UK at the moment, they can provide this, as she expressed it, a non-anxious presence,
Right.
because you're not a nurse or a social care worker who's rushing off to do something else, and you're not a family member whose concern for the individual feels overwhelming at times. But that listener, that chaplain, that Anna chaplain, can be that quiet presence that listens to a story, or maybe just has silence, but it's just being there that matters a lot.
Can I just quickly say something more about this idea of there being a different model of church around? Because one of the things that's bringing about is a very radical change in the role of the clergy, and a very radical change in how people see the clergy. If there was a time in people's lives when they saw them as people who could do no wrong, and who knew the answer to every problem and could solve everything, and could tell them what to do in their lives, I think those days are gone. And for many people, that's a loss, because they in a sense, they needed to feel that there was that person there who knew how to do things. And so the role of the clergy is obviously going to be a huge issue for the clergy themselves, but it's also a huge issue for the rest of us, in the sense of needing to do some learning, do some growing, doing some thinking about our faith and our practice in life, without that sense that there's somebody telling us how to do it.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we also need to be aware of, that people's understanding of spirituality is very different, and different elements in our lives contribute to spiritual well-being. It could be music is one of the fundamentals, but so is relationship. And one of the things that we sort of touched on in one of our conversations was about the use of language, and that in a care home, very religious language might alienate somebody. Very overt sort of spiritual language, the same. It's finding that kind of medium that actually is what somebody understands and has that meaning and purpose to their lives. Is the meaning because I need to go in the garden every day? I need to feel the wind on my face. Is it that I value my daughter or my pal coming in to see me at home or in a care home? So it's trying to tease out those things, and that takes time. And the time is very, very precious, and we need to use it carefully and acknowledge people have very different approaches.
I know that chaplains find it very difficult when they're going to the dying, that they are often sent away because the dying or the elderly are not comfortable with what I call churchy language. And they haven't perhaps grown up with it. It makes them feel spooky. They don't like it. And churchy language is an issue that we need to address. It's a challenge for all of us. If we're talking a language that people don't understand, then we need to think about that.
Just as I know you want to move on to questions, Amanda, I mean, I think one of the things that does come out of the sort of discussions is empowering congregations, empowering individuals, whether they're clergy or members of the congregation, to be able to feel they can do more, that they can use their gifts, they can use their experience to the benefit of each other. And maybe that needs a bit more training across the board.
Yeah. It's a very different mindset, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for that starter conversation on that. And it is a topic which, sometimes is just brushed under the carpet, and it shouldn't be. And at the tablet, we're really keen to air some of these conversations and just start a conversation. We've had Brendan Grimley, who's asked a question. He says, I agree with the preciousness and treasure of age, but I wonder to what extent we elderly create isolationist thinking for ourselves, particularly with respect to hanging on to the idea of church we knew from youth and which we want to see take us to the end. I came across many parishes where the age profile of the congregation is heavily skewed to later years, and any change is looked on badly, never mind what is needed to keep future generations supported. Maureen, do you want to comment on that?
Oh, I think that's quite a strong feeling held by many people, and I think it is most. I think there are some traditions where the congregations are definitely growing older, and there are others where it's much more youthful. And it's not one or the other. I think it is this dilemma of how do we bring different ages together so it's of mutual benefit. And I know that within the Church of Scotland, for instance, we had a seminar on generations working together, intergenerational church, and for some people it's a bit of a struggle to accept that you know we need to encourage more people in, but it's not this focus that only youth matters as we grow church. It's got to acknowledge, the gifts and support that are already there. I wish I had an answer because I'm sure there would be a rush to implement some of the things, but I think some of what we were talking about, making congregations feeling more empowered to do things rather than it all being top down, I think encourages more people in. And I know from some work we did with other faith communities that encouraging younger people to join the vestry or the executive, or however you describe it in different traditions, actually was really important. So you got that cross purpose. And the reflection was, if you've got younger people, they want to make the coffee as well as be part of worship. They want to do the practical things as well. So it's not us older people hanging on to all those functions, because that gave us a role. We have to let go, as Mary, you were talking about letting go, and we have to let go sometimes of things that like that, to let it move on.
Absolutely.
Mary, just thinking about your sort of clinical and pastoral background, how can liturgy and the community life be more exclusive or inclusive, of people living with dementia or physical frailty?
Yes, that's a really, really difficult question, isn't it? It seems to me that when people are living with dementia, they have a very deeply held lifetime of attendance at liturgy. It goes back to the year dot as far as they're concerned, and it's deeply held, and it remains meaningful and precious to them, even when at a different level they're not able to comprehend the words or know who the people are or remember that this is their familiar church even. So in a sense, what they're doing is they're capitalizing on a lifetime of spiritual practice. And I actually think that really does hold. Would you agree with that, Maureen?
Absolutely. Our experience is that it's that memory of ritual, that memory of the rhythm of worship that is incredibly important. And going into a care home, not to rush anything with worship, but to allow that rhythm to be there, and familiarity with prayers and things. People recite prayers. It just comes sort of naturally, and I think it's important that we observe that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that away from the liturgy, and in a way it goes to the morality or the ethics, is how we continue to welcome people who are no longer as able
Yeah.
physically or mentally into our congregations.
Mm.
If somebody arrives and nobody says hello to them because they don't know what to say, that person feels very isolated.
Mm.
And if you've spent 30 years in a congregation and no one talks to you at coffee or supports you, actually we're doing a huge disservice
Yeah.
to wider community, because we will lose not just them, but we will lose more widely. And the number of times I've come across people saying that the welcome was the most important thing, the feeling of inclusion and carrying on a tradition that they've long had. The other thing that has cropped up is very often retired clergy certainly in the Episcopal Church, very often go back and do services. And in my church, we've got 2 or 3 retired clergy who do support the sacrament and so on. And for them, not being able to do that anymore is a huge loss. I don't know what happens in the Catholic tradition as much, but that was a key part of their lives, and suddenly it's not possible to do that anymore. So how you encompass that kind of loss for somebody, I think, is a really important thing for us to consider.
I just wanted to add something to that, which is that we are very verbal in our liturgy, in our prayer lives. It's almost as though we've been conditioned to think that if you're not saying words, you're not doing anything. And when people become cognitively disabled, the last thing, the thing they can't cope with is words, because they can't hold on to the meaning of the words. So it I think it challenges us to be really aware that it isn't all about words. There is also the non-verbal level of our spiritual practice, and that for people in that situation, to have their hand held or to be in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament within the Catholic tradition is a non-verbal and very important and profound aspect of worship. So trying to find ways of talking to or explaining or any of those things is, I think, probably barking up the wrong tree.
Agree.
We've had another question in it. It's just saying, what would you say to church leaders who want to support their older members but aren't sure how? what would you say? What would the three things be that you would be top of your list that you'd say, well, if you did this, this, and this, I think people would respond positively to that?
Mm.
Well, I would say, I'm not going to say that we're going to do this, this, and this. I'm going to say, what would you like us to do? What is it that we can build on? What experience do we share that can make things happen together? And that does mean there has to be a good, strong relationship between clergy and other people with a, if you like, authority within the church to enable and allow, and if decisions are made, actually to follow them through. I think that's really important. But I think asking is not a bad thing.
If I can just go back to what I was saying about the Synod final document. So the way that the Synod works is something called conversations in the spirit. And quite often you would use a talking stick. So you pass the talking stick round the table and everybody is listening deeply and carefully to what everybody says. And the important issue is that the person who is maybe quietest, most shy, has difficulty with articulation, maybe can only say one word, that's the one that you're wanting to listen to. And what you're doing, the whole purpose of that is listening for the voice of the Holy Spirit. So it's completely within that movement of the Synod to recognize that we really need to listen to everybody, because the Holy Spirit is going to be speaking through all of the baptized, not just the ones who speak loudest or who have got posh ideas. And I think that would be my answer to that question. I really believe in that process.
Absolutely. And I think when we looked at how people want to support those with dementia or mental health, that opportunity for different people to speak from their own experience has been really important. You can do it with post-it notes, you can do it with civic cafe type, all sorts of different, quite imaginative approaches, which I think Mary's example has very clearly illustrated.
We've had a question in from Peter, and he says, how can the elderly cope with lifetime changes in the church's moral stance on such things as gay relationships or birth control? He says, I grew up being told that both were sinful, but now what? What do you think to that?
I think there are very different sort of attitudes to that in terms of different faiths. I think lots of faiths struggle with those things now, and there isn't unanimity very often, which is about the approach to take. So I really don't have an answer to that. My personal feeling is tolerance, understanding, and acceptance of difference. But
yeah, and the language of the Synod about this is that we don't have to all agree. That trying to arrive at consensus means that you haven't listened to everybody. So the way that the Holy Spirit speaks is not by arriving at consensus. It's by listening carefully to everybody. So, coming up with these various moral issues as though we should all think alike is actually the other model of church. And the chances of us all thinking alike are really very small.
And clearly over generations, we have not thought alike.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over centuries, I should say, we have not thought alike.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've had a question in from Lavinia. This is a question for Mary. And Lavinia says, so what are the spiritual tasks of aging?
Okay. She would obviously like me to read my little list again. I think that all of the psychological, emotional tasks are also spiritual tasks. And clearly the overriding spiritual task is the preparation for death. And the preparation for death will depend on people's earliest experience of being contained and held in a highly secure, loving environment. And many people haven't had that early experience. So the range of ways in which people are able to even begin to think about their own death is very great. And that requires that people are able to do what Thomas Keating was talking about, which is to bring the emotional junk of a lifetime into consciousness and face it and work with it. And I would see that as being the central task, really.
Okay.
And it's much, I think it probably requires that there is somebody doing some supportive holding while that task is being undertaken. So the losses, the grieving, the regrets, and the development of resilience, all of which are those tasks of the end of life, will be more likely to be possible when there is some, as Maureen says, when there is that support for that process going on.
I think I would add to that, helping somebody acceptance of, the situation, and in order to be, more open to seeing God in the picture at end of life, so that they can, maybe they've got to reconcile with family, or need to feel forgiven for something that happened, So I think those things, it provides an opportunity, but it does mean you need somebody to support you and be with you.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a family member. It needs somebody to help you.
Yeah.
And we've got time for one more question. Sort of the question that we've got is what gives you hope about the role of older Catholics or people of faith in the church today? Mary, what gives you
Well,
hope?
the first thought that comes to my mind are those young people that gathered in Rome earlier in the year, in the summer, with Pope Leo. There are some fantastic people out there, and also, yeah, this sense of kind of growing into a more mature community of people, that I can feel it happening. I feel as though that's what I'm experiencing in all sorts of ways. I'm a spiritual director, and I'm really hearing that voice.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And
I think there's, when I listen to young and old talking about their faith across the world, it does give you a huge hope for the future.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge sense of the role that faith can play in our lives, that we need to acknowledge and not be embarrassed by faith. I don't want government to put us in a position where we're almost apologizing for being people of faith because they don't like X, Y, and Z. So I think there's a huge amount of hope, and I think it needs to be fundamental, especially in the really very tricky times we're living in.
well, thank you so much. Thank you to Maureen. Thank you to Mary for taking us through that conversation. I think we're just at the start of this conversation. Again, if you'd like the recording of this, or you want to get in touch with Maureen or Mary and pick up any of the issues that have been talked about this evening, then please just drop me an email, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to start up a conversation with you. As we look forward now onto what's coming up, September is quite a busy period for us at the tablet. We've got lots of education supplements coming up. We've got supplements coming up on pilgrimages, etc. But our events continue to thrive, and we're really pleased with every person that joins us on our webinars. Coming up, we have the dignity of workers in the 21st century. So we've got Raymond Friel, OBE, who'll be talking to Dr. Maria Excel, Clifford Longley, and Sir John Battle. And that event is on Wednesday, the 24th of September. Tickets for that can be found on the Tablet website. We've also got the fourth in our series of spiritualities, looking at particular orders. This is a two-part online event with Father Matthew Blake. The theory and the practice. So Carmelite spirituality, bringing decades of lived Carmelite wisdom to this unique two-part series. So that's on the 25th and the 26th of September. We have our live events. So we've got Unveiled, Why Are So Few Women Becoming Nuns Today. If you're interested in that, then that's at the Cardinal Vaughan Memorial School in London, Thursday, the 2nd of October. And we have From Francis to Leo, Reshaping the Church for a Change of Era, with Ed Sturton talking to Austin Ivory. That's at the CCLA Investment Management Offices, also in London. We have a pilgrimage going out this weekend, which is to Paris, looking at a journey of faith and history, all included in Notre Dame Cathedral. We've also got Return Eurostar. There are tickets available. I think there's 2 tickets available if you still want to go on that one. So if you're interested in that, do get in touch. And then we've got our Rome pilgrimages to Rome and Assisi, and we have pilgrimages to Fatima and also to Knock, and that's next year in May and September. The tablet continues to thrive. We've just appointed our Rome correspondent, so if you're interested in all things Rome, then please do have a look at how to get your subscription for the tablet. You can subscribe by going to www.thetablet.co.uk. And if you're interested and you are a subscriber, you can get a free digital copy for a family member or friend, so that we can bring more subscribers on board. It is our 185th anniversary this year, and we're celebrating in all sorts of ways, but just looking through the archive, dating back, we've got the first copy ever printed in 1840 on that archive. It's an absolute joy to have a look through. So if you want to get involved with celebrating with us, then please do take out a subscription. We also have a digital subscription available for £21.50, and that's per quarter. So I've really enjoyed working with Maureen and Mary on this call. It's been just really lovely, just reflecting on how older people can really contribute to a church. And on behalf of myself, Maureen and Mary, we'd just like to wish you a very good evening. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Take care now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.